I'd done maybe 300 site inspections by the time I pulled into the Mather Mill lot that Tuesday. Could have been more. After a certain number, they stop being distinct events and just become the job. You drive out, you walk through, you fill in the boxes, you drive back. Some sites are worse than others. Some smell bad. Some have ceilings that make you nervous. But they're all more or less the same shape of thing. And you get a feel for how long they take, and you stop thinking about them as anything other than hours on a timesheet. Mather Mill was supposed to be 4 hours. I had it blocked out in my calendar. Mather Mill, Sistersville, 4 hours. And then a hard stop because I had a call with the property attorney at 2. The sale was closing Friday. Not might close Friday, not we're targeting Friday. Friday. The buyer's financing had a hard expiration on it, and the attorney had explained this to me twice already, in a tone that suggested he was considering explaining it a third time. So, 4 hours. In and out. I got there at 7:45. The lot was gravel, which meant my boots were already picking up that fine gray dust before I even got to the front door. There's a specific kind of gravel they use on old industrial sites in this part of West Virginia. Not crushed limestone, something darker, almost black when it's wet. And it was wet that morning. Everything was wet. The sky was the color of old dishwater, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't finished happening yet. I noted that in a general way, the way you note weather when you're about to spend 4 hours in a building with a compromised roof. The county contact I was expecting was a man named Dennis Pruitt. I'd worked with Dennis twice before. He was fine. Showed up on time, signed what he had signed, and stayed out of the way. I was expecting his truck. Instead, there was a dark blue Honda Civic parked near the gate, and a woman standing next to him in a blazer that was not going to survive his build. I figured there'd been a scheduling mix-up. That happens. I parked and got out, and she came over with a folder and a set of keys on a county lanyard and introduced herself as Judith Sanchez, assessor's office. "Dennis is out sick," she said. "They reassigned the witness." "You been out here before?" She looked at the building. "No." She said it like she was aware that was probably the wrong answer. I looked at her shoes. Flats. The kind you wear to walk across a parking lot to a conference room. I almost told her to go back to town, that I'd reschedule. I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. But the structural forms had a county witness line on them, and if I left without a signature, I'd have to come back, and I could not come back before Friday, and the attorney's voice was already in my head doing its third explanation tone. "Okay," I said. "Stay close. Watch your step. Don't touch anything that looks load-bearing." She nodded and wrote something in her folder. I don't know what. Maybe, "Don't touch things." She seemed like someone who took notes. The front door was a heavy steel fire door, the kind that takes both hands and a lean. Judith got the key in, and I pushed it open, and the smell hit us both at the same time. 11 years of closed air, mold, machine oil, and something underneath all of that I can only describe as wet stone. Old buildings smell like the thing they used to do. Textile mills smell like work. The entry corridor was dark. I had my flashlight out before the door finished swinging. The overhead fluorescents were long dead, and the windows on the lower level were either boarded or so caked with grime they might as well have been. The file photos I'd been sent were from the last inspection, which had been done in the spring of 2019. They showed a dirty but structurally unremarkable lower floor, concrete, machinery footings, some water staining on the east wall. The file photos were not current. The floor was underwater, not flooded, not like someone had left a hose running, but there was standing water across the entire lower level, maybe 2 to 3 inches deep, dark and completely still. My flashlight beam hit it and just stopped. You couldn't see the floor through it. It had the look of water that had been there a while, settled and undisturbed, not moving at all. I stood there for a second. "Is that supposed to be here?" Judith asked. "No." I swept the light along the walls. Somewhere there was a burst pipe, I found the source about 30 feet in, a section of overhead supply line that had failed at a joint, probably during a freeze. It had been draining into the lower level long enough for the water to go completely still and dark. I logged it, wrote burst supply line, lower level flooding, approx 2 to 3 inch depth, source identified, and kept going. The freight elevator at the far end of the corridor was dead. The gate was up, the car was somewhere above us, and the control panel was blank. I'd used the stairs. I was about halfway down the corridor, picking my way along the wall where the water was shallower, when I caught the boiler room door in my flashlight beam. It was a heavy door, industrial, the kind with a bar handle. It was wedged shut from the outside. Someone had threaded an iron pipe through the handle bracket and braced it against the door frame. The pipe was old, surface rust on it, been there a while. I wrote boiler room, exterior pipe brace, Prever contractor safety measure in my notes, and moved on. It was the kind of thing contractors do when they decommission a space, seal off anything with residual pressure risk, anything they don't want a liability walking into. Made sense. I didn't think about it past that. We took the stairs up to the second floor, and the building changed. The upper level was dry. Well, dry-ish. Better light through the clear-story windows. The old weaving machinery was still in place, massive iron frames bolted to the floor in long rows, and I started in on the photography, working left to right the way I always do. Judith stayed near the stairwell and wrote things in her folder. I could hear her pen. I was maybe 40 minutes in, halfway through the machinery bay, when she called out from the stairwell. "Hey, sorry. I borrowed your phone earlier to check the weather. The battery's dead." I stopped shooting. "Mine or yours?" "Mine. I've got a bad charging cable." I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. 41%. There was a notification on the screen. A banner, yellow, the kind that pushes through even on silent. Flash flood warning, Tyler County, Little Kanawha River rising. Road flooding expected. Seek higher ground. I read it twice. Then I looked at the timestamp. It had come through 11 minutes ago. I walked to the nearest clear-story window and looked out. The sky to the south had gone a different color. Not just gray now, but greenish-gray, the specific shade that means the rain is already happening somewhere close and moving this way. The access road below was still clear, barely. 4 hours had just become something else. I told Judith to move. Didn't explain why. Just set it fast and started toward the stairwell, and she followed, which I was grateful for because I didn't have time to convince anyone of anything. I had the camera bag over one shoulder and my phone in my hand, and I was already doing math. 1 floor down, through the corridor, out the front. Maybe 2 minutes, if the stairs were clear. I checked them on the way up, and they were fine. Wet in spots, some rust on the railing. Nothing that would stop us. She kept up. I'll give her that. The lower corridor was darker than I remembered. The clear-story windows on that level were smaller, and half of them were painted over, and whatever light had been coming through before was gone now. I had my flashlight clipped to my jacket, and I clicked it on. The beam caught the floor about 15 feet ahead, and I stopped walking. The standing water from the burst pipe had been ankle deep when we came through the first time. Maybe 4 inches. Dark, still, smelled like rust and old concrete. I'd logged it, stepped around the worst of it, moved on. It wasn't ankle deep anymore. It was at my knee. Maybe higher. The whole corridor floor was gone under it, and it wasn't still. It was moving, slow but definite, coming in from somewhere at the far end. The boiler room direction. I swept the flashlight left and right. The baseboards were submerged. The bottom foot of the walls was wet and dark. The water had a color to it, that specific rust brown you get when old iron and sediment mix in, and it was moving the way rivers move when they're patient and don't need to hurry. "Oh," Judith said behind me. That was it, just "oh." I kept the flashlight moving, The front exit was maybe 60 feet ahead, through the water. The door itself was elevated 2 steps above the corridor floor. I'd noticed that on the way in, old flood mitigation, probably original to the building. So the door was still above the waterline. Probably. I couldn't see the steps from where I was standing, but I knew they were there. I went in. The water was cold. Not cold like a swimming pool, cold like something that had been underground for a long time and wasn't interested in warming up. It came through my cargo pants immediately, soaked my boots, and I just kept moving because stopping wasn't going to make it better. The footing was uneven. I could feel debris under my boots, soft things and hard things. Couldn't see any of it. I moved with my arms out a little for balance and my flashlight forward, and I didn't look down. Judith was right behind me. I could hear her breathing. We made the steps. I went up first and pushed the front door, and it opened, which I'd been about 60% sure it would. And then I was outside and the air hit me, and it was cold and wet and tasted like rain. The lot was flooded. Not a little. Not some puddles at the low end. The whole lower section from the building face out to where I'd parked was underwater. Rust-colored, moving, maybe 8 inches deep at the near edge and deeper toward the lot barrier. I could see my car, a gray Chevy Colorado, parked about 40 feet out. It was still there, still upright, water at the door sills, reachable. Barely, but reachable. I looked at the access road up the hill. Judith's car was up there, a white Honda something, dry. The road itself was still passable, or looked like it from where I was standing. I figured if I could get to my truck, get it started, drive it up the access road before the lot got any worse, we could both get out. Judith could follow in her car. 40 feet of knee-deep water was bad, but it wasn't impossible. I'd done worse on site work. I stepped off the threshold and started moving. I got maybe 20 feet out. The surge came from the south end of the lot, from the direction of the river, and it wasn't gradual. It was a single pulse, like something had been holding back a volume of water and let it go all at once. The level jumped, not rose, jumped, and the current went from moving slowly to moving with intention. And I planted my feet and leaned into it and stayed upright, but just barely. My truck shifted. It moved sideways, slow and heavy, the way vehicles move when water gets under them and takes the weight off the tires. It went maybe 4 feet, and then the front passenger corner hit the lot barrier, a concrete curb running the perimeter, and it stopped there. Tilted a few degrees. Still running, I could see the exhaust. But the angle was wrong and the current was pushing at the driver's side, and I understood that I was not getting in that truck. I stood there in the water for a second, just processing. Then I turned around and went back inside. Judith was still on the threshold steps, dry from the knees up, watching me come back. She didn't say anything. I got back inside and pushed the door shut and stood there, dripping on the corridor floor, and looked at the water level and thought about the 4 to 5 hours I'd originally planned to be here, and how that number felt now. "My car's blocked," I said. She nodded. "I saw. Yours is still up on the road." "I know." She paused. "We can't get to it." We couldn't. Not through that surge. Maybe when it settled, but I didn't know when that would be, and I didn't want to be standing in a flooded lot when the next one came through. We went back upstairs. I spent the next 20 minutes walking the upper floor looking for a signal. My phone had been at 41%, and I was watching the battery like it owed me money. The river stone walls were thick, original construction, probably 18 inches in some sections, and they killed the signal almost everywhere. I got 1 bar near the west stairwell and lost it when I moved. Nothing in the break room. Nothing in the records room. I tried the machinery bay and got 2 bars for about 4 seconds, and then nothing. The east window was the last one I tried. It faced the river directly, which felt counterintuitive, but I got 3 bars there and they held. I don't know why. Something about the angle, the gap between the building and the tree line, the fact that the stone was thinner on that side. I didn't question it. I dialed 911 and it connected on the second ring. The dispatcher had a slow voice, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world, which I found both calming and a little frustrating given the circumstances. He said his name was Stanley Peterson. He took my information without rushing, name, location, situation, and I could hear him typing, steady and even. "Road access to the river district is blocked," he said. "We've got reports from Millstone Road and both county routes off the bridge. Nothing's getting through right now. What's the timeline? Road's clear, we get a crew out, 4 to 6 hours minimum. Could be less depending on how fast the water drops." 4 to 6 hours. I said it back to him to make sure I had it right. He confirmed it. I asked if there was anything else he needed from me, and he said to stay on the upper level, stay away from the water, keep the phone charged if I could. He said it like he'd said it before, which he probably had. "I've got a second person with me," I said. "County Assessor's Office." "Noted," he said. "Both of you stay put. We'll get there." I stood at the east window after I hung up and looked down at the lot. The water was still rising. My truck was still tilted against the barrier, exhaust still running, which meant the engine hadn't flooded yet, but it would. The lot barrier itself was half submerged. The tree line beyond the access road was moving in the wind. I watched the water for a while, checking the level, mostly, trying to figure out how fast it was rising and whether the upper floor was actually safe or just safer. The building had been here since 1912, and it had flooded before, clearly, and the upper floor was still standing. I figured that meant something. I went back to the break room and told Judith about the timeline. She took it okay. She sat down in one of the plastic chairs and put her folder on the table and didn't say much. I found 2 bottles of water in my bag from that morning and gave her one. We sat there for a while. I made 2 more trips to the east window over the next hour, checking levels, checking the lot. The second trip, the truck engine had stopped. The water was up to the door handles. The third trip, I looked down and saw something moving in the floodwater along the exterior wall. Not debris, not a log, not anything the current was pushing. It was moving against the current. Slow and deliberate, pale against the rust-brown water, too large for what it should have been. It moved along the base of the wall and then it stopped, directly below the window, and I stood there with my hand on the stone frame and watched it. That part bugged me a little. I didn't look at it for long. I stepped back from the window and stood in the hallway and just kind of held still for a second. Not frozen, just processing. That's me in a crisis. I don't panic. I just go quiet inside while the gears catch up. It's a useful quality about 30% of the time. I went back to the break room doorway. Judith was still in her plastic chair, folder open on the table in front of her, going through her paperwork like she was waiting on a delayed flight. She'd found a vending machine somewhere on her own. There was a bag of Doritos next to her elbow, half empty, the orange kind. Cool Ranch are the better choice, but I didn't say anything. "Water's still rising," I said. She looked up. "How much?" "Steady, nothing new." That was mostly true. She nodded and went back to her folder. I watched her for a second. She was doing that thing people do when they're scared and trying not to show it. Very focused on ordinary tasks. Very interested in paperwork she'd already read twice. I understood it. I do the same thing. I just didn't have any paperwork left to pretend to care about, so I needed something else to do with my hands and my brain. I told her I was going to look for a secondary exit, roof hatch, loading access, anything upper level. She said, "Okay." Didn't ask why. I think she was glad to have a reason to believe someone had a plan. The records room was 2 doors down from the break room, on the north end of the upper floor. I'd clocked it on the way in. Metal shelving units, filing cabinets, the kind of room that exists in every industrial building and nobody ever touches. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and hit the light switch out of habit, and nothing happened, obviously. used my flashlight instead. The room smelled like wet cardboard and something older underneath that. The shelving on the left wall had partially collapsed, one unit tipped forward and leaning against the next one like a domino that hadn't finished falling. Papers everywhere. A lot of them were water damaged from some previous event, edges brown and warped, stuck together. A ceiling tile in the back corner had come down and taken some insulation with it. There was a yellow hard hat on the floor that had been there long enough to collect dust on the inside. I moved along the walls, checking for hatches, checking the ceiling. There was a vent panel near the north wall that was too small for a person. No loading door, no hatch I could find. The north wall had one window, smaller than the east one, with a view of the side lot. I looked out. The water was up past the loading dock concrete. The dock itself was gone under the surface. Whatever had been parked out there, I couldn't see it anymore. I turned back to the collapsed shelving and started moving pieces of it because I needed to see the wall behind it. It was slow going. The unit was heavy, even tipped over, and the papers underneath it were matted into a kind of wet pulp that made the floor slippery. I got the first section moved and found the wall behind it, which was just wall, no hatch. I moved the second section and found more wall and also a cardboard box that had been crushed flat under the shelving. And on top of the crushed box, a 3-ring binder in a yellow plastic cover. I almost left it there. I picked it up because it was in my way, and I looked at the cover because that's just what you do. The label on the spine said OSHA Incident, Mather Mill, 2004. I stood there with my flashlight on it for a second. Then I took it to the window where the light was better and opened it. The official section was standard. I've read hundreds of these. Incident date, site description, personnel involved, findings. The format doesn't change much across decades. 3 workers, one night in November, flash flood event along the Little Kanawha. Names listed: Robert Kane, Dennis Folk, Terry Moss. Status: presumed drowned. The official narrative was about 4 paragraphs and said essentially that the flood conditions had been severe, that the workers had been on the lower level when the water rose, and that recovery efforts had been unsuccessful. Case closed. Signed off by 2 county inspectors and a state safety officer. That was the official section. Behind it, someone had added pages. Handwritten, on-lined notebook paper, 3-hole punched and inserted into the binder rings. The handwriting was blocky and uneven, the kind of writing that belongs to someone who doesn't do it often. Capital letters in the wrong places. No commas anywhere. The ink was blue ballpoint and had bled a little in the upper margins where water had touched the paper at some point. At the bottom of the first added page, a name: Maurice Alexander, site foreman. I read it standing at the window with the river running below me and the flashlight in my left hand. Maurice Alexander had written that the 3 workers were not on the lower level when the water rose. He'd written that they'd been in the upper room, all 3 of them, waiting for the flood to pass, the same as you'd do. He'd written that the water hadn't reached them. And then he'd written, and this is the part I read twice, that he didn't know what came up from below, but it was not the water. That was it. That was the whole addendum. 6 sentences, maybe 7. No elaboration. No description of what he'd seen or heard. Just the plain statement that whatever took those 3 men out of the upper room of Mather Mill in November of 2004, it was not the flood. I stayed at the window for a minute. The river was loud from here, that low constant sound it makes when it's moving fast and carrying things. I flipped back through the binder looking for anything I'd missed. There was a reference near the back, a handwritten note in the same blocky writing, just a page number and a year. 1994 report, see cross file. I went back to the collapsed shelving and looked at the other papers on the floor. Most of them were garbage, maintenance logs, equipment invoices, a stack of time cards from the 90s that had fused together. But there was a second binder under the far edge of the shelving unit, thinner than the first, green cover, no label. I pulled it out. It was a 1994 incident report. Different owner, different company name on the header. Something called Alderman Textile Holdings, which I'd never heard of. Different inspectors. Different everything except two things. 2 missing workers, November, flood event, Little Kanawha, presumed drowned. And at the back, behind the official pages, the same lined notebook paper, the same blocky handwriting, the same blue ballpoint ink. Maurice Alexander, site foreman. I read the addendum. Then I read it again because I thought I'd made a mistake. I hadn't made a mistake. It was word for word the same as the 2004 notes, not similar. Not the same general idea and different phrasing, the same sentences in the same order with the same capital letters in the wrong places and the same missing commas. Like he'd memorized what he'd written the first time and just written it again 10 years later because nothing new had happened that needed saying. He'd been at this building twice, across a decade, and he'd survived both times. I closed both binders and held them against my chest with my flashlight tucked under my arm. And I stood in the records room in the dark with the rain coming down outside and the river running below the window, and Judith sitting 2 doors down with her Doritos and her folder. The building was still standing. The river was still rising. And I was holding a record of something that had happened here before. Twice that I knew of. Probably more that I didn't. I looked at the window. I didn't go to it. I walked back to the break room with both binders tucked under my arm. Judith looked up when I came in. She had the folder open on the table in front of her, the county forms spread out, and she was clicking a pen that had probably run out of ink an hour ago. The Doritos bag was on its side. She'd finished them. "Anything useful?" she asked. "Some old incident reports." I set the binders down on the table, face down. "Nothing that changes our situation." That was technically true. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. I needed a second to think, and I needed to look like I wasn't thinking. I'm okay at that. Not great, but okay. "We should stay close to the east window," I said. "That's where the signal is. When the crew gets moving, they'll probably try to reach us by radio before they get close enough to see us. We want to be able to hear that and respond fast." Judith nodded. She looked tired. Her blazer was draped over the back of the chair and she had her arms crossed in front of her, not in an annoyed way, just cold. The building wasn't heated, and the rain had dropped the temperature a few degrees since morning. I could see her breath a little. "How much longer do you think?" she asked. "Hard to say. Stanley said 4 to 6 hours from when I called. That was..." I checked my watch. "About 2.5 hours ago." She nodded again. Did the math. Didn't say anything about it. I got up and went to the east window. The water in the lot below was higher. Not dramatically higher, but I'd been checking it every 20 minutes or so, and the line on the building's exterior wall had crept up. The lot barrier Judith's car was parked above was almost submerged. The surface of the water was dark and moving, catching what light came through the clouds. Nothing at the wall. I stood there for a minute, watching. Then I went back to the break room. Judith had put the pen down and was just sitting there. I asked if she wanted the other half of the granola bar I'd found in my jacket pocket earlier. She said yes. I gave it to her. We didn't talk much after that. I moved the binders to the windowsill in the break room, face down, and sat where I could see the door to the hallway. That's when the sounds started. Not loud. That's the thing. If I'd been asleep, I might not have heard it at all. But I wasn't asleep. I was sitting very still in a cold room, listening to a building I didn't know. And after a while, you learn the sounds a building makes when it's just settling. The ticks and pops, the way metal contracts, the way water moves through pipes in a particular rhythm. This wasn't that. It was coming from the lower level. A slow, deliberate sound, like something dragging through water, but not frantic, not debris catching on a corner and releasing. It moved in a pattern. Stop, move, stop, move. The pauses were even. Whatever it wasn't being carried. Judith heard it too. I saw her go still.
What is that?
She asked. Probably the current, I said. Water moves debris in weird ways when it's channeled through a space. Sounds like it's moving with purpose, but it's just hydraulics. I said it the same way I'd say anything on a job site, flat and confident and slightly bored. She looked at me for a second, then back at the door. The sound moved again, slower this time, then stopped. I got up and went to the east window. I told Judith I was going to check the water level. I looked down. It was standing in the floodwater below the window. I don't know how else to describe it except to say it was wrong in a way that was immediately obvious and also completely hard to name. Too tall. The proportions were off, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow, the way it held itself too upright for something standing in moving water. It was pale. Not white, but the color of wood that's been submerged and waterlogged. That gray-white that doesn't look like skin and doesn't look like anything else either. It was standing against the current, not struggling, just standing. Its face was turned up toward the window, toward me. I stepped back. The sounds from below stopped. I stood with my back against the wall next to the window for probably 30 seconds. Then I went back to the break room and sat down. Current's still rising, I said. We're fine up here. Judith said, okay. I waited about 10 minutes. Then I told her I was going to check the stairwell for water intrusion and went back to the east window. It was still there. Same position, same angle, face still up, waiting. I went back to the records room and opened the binder again. I read slower this time. I wasn't looking for the general shape of what had happened anymore. I was looking for the specific details that the official reports had smoothed over, the parts where Maurice's handwriting showed up in the margins or between typed lines, the places where someone had clearly tried to reconcile what the paperwork said with what had actually been found. The 2004 incident. 3 workers, Daryl Oates, age 29, Kevin Marsh, age 34. A third man whose name I couldn't fully make out because the ink had run. The official report said all 3 were presumed drowned during the flood event. The official report noted that floodwater had reached the upper level, which was consistent with water intrusion evidence documented at the time. Maurice's addendum said the water hadn't reached the upper level. He'd been specific about that. He'd written the waterline height on the exterior wall, and he'd noted the height of the upper floor threshold, and the numbers didn't match. The water had been 8 inches short. I looked at the individual worker entries. Daryl Oates had been in the lower level. The report noted he'd been working near the freight elevator when the flood event began. Kevin Marsh had been documented near the stairwell. The third worker, the one whose name I couldn't read, had been in the upper floor break room. I checked the 1994 report. 2 workers that time, both documented as having sheltered in place on the upper level, waiting for the water to recede. Both missing. I sat with that for a second. Then I looked at Morris's survival notes. Not a formal section, just a few lines he'd added at the back of the 2004 binder in different ink, like he'd come back to it later. He wrote that he'd been on the roof both times, that he'd been shouting, that he'd been trying to get visual contact with the road crew he knew was coming. He wrote that he'd kept moving because standing still on a roof in a flood event was how you got hypothermia, so he'd kept moving and making noise and waving his arms like an idiot. He wrote, I do not know why I am here and they are not. I have thought about it. I think it is because I did not stop. I read that 3 times. Then I went back through both incidents, slower, and I looked at every worker's last documented position. Lower level, stairwell, upper room, stationary, upper level, sheltering in place, upper level, sheltering in place. Maurice Alexander, roof, moving, shouting, alive. Every person who had gone still and waited had gone missing. Every single one. And the one man who had survived across both events, a decade apart in the same building, had not stopped moving. I closed the binder. I sat in the dark records room with the rain on the windows and the river below, and Judith 2 doors down, sitting in a chair, still and quiet, exactly where I'd told her to stay. The sound started again from the lower level, patient, rhythmic, moving toward the stairs. I got up off the floor. That was the whole thought. That was the only thing I could hold on to right then. Just stand up, Sawyer, and move. So I did. The records room was dark except for my flashlight, and the rain was still going outside, and the sounds from below were closer than they'd been 10 minutes ago. Patient. Like something that had done this before and wasn't in a hurry because it already knew how it ended. I'd spent hours being helpful. That's what kept hitting me. I'd been so practical about the whole thing. Okay, flood event, limited signal. Here's the safest room. Here's what we do. Stay put and wait for rescue. I'd been calm and methodical, and I'd walked Judith into a chair in a quiet room and told her to sit still, and I'd been doing the creature's job for it the whole time. I'm not usually the guy who misses things. That's kind of the whole point of what I do. You look at a structure and you see what's wrong before it becomes a problem. I'd looked at everything except the pattern I was standing inside of. I didn't let myself sit with that for long. There wasn't time. I carried the binder back to the break room. Judith was where I'd left her, sitting on the edge of the folding table, arms crossed, watching the door. She looked up when I came in, and I could tell she'd been listening to the sounds too, because her face had that particular kind of stillness people get when they're trying very hard not to show that they're scared.
What's down there?
She said. Not a question, really. I don't know exactly. That was true. But I know what it does, and I know how to make it leave. She looked at the binder under my arm.
Is that from the records room?
Yeah.
What's in it?
I set it on the table. Previous incidents. Same building, same conditions. There's a pattern. I kept my voice flat and practical, like I was explaining a load-bearing issue to a client. It takes people who stay still. Every single person who went missing in this building during a flood, they were stationary, sheltering in place, waiting quietly. Judith didn't say anything for a second.
And the people who didn't go missing? One guy. He kept moving, kept making noise. Both times, decade apart, he walked out.
She looked at me.
Both times.
Yeah.
So we need to move.
You need to move. Get to the east window, the one with the signal. Keep moving around the room. Don't stay in one spot. Make noise, talk, shout, whatever. Call out toward the lot in case the crew gets here early. I paused. I need you to do that while I go deal with the other part.
What other part?
The boiler room. I picked up my flashlight. There's something I need to check down there. I won't be gone long. She grabbed my arm, not hard, just enough.
Sawyer.
Keep moving, I said it. That's the whole thing, don't stop. She let go. I could see her working through it, whether to argue, whether to ask more questions, whether to follow me. She was smart enough to know I wasn't telling her everything, but she was also scared enough that a clear instruction felt better than nothing. So she slid off the table and walked toward the east window, and I heard her start talking, low and steady, just to fill the air. I went back into the corridor. The sounds from the lower level had been moving toward the stairs. I stood at the top of the stairwell and listened. Still there, patient, not rushing. The boiler room was at the far end of the ground floor corridor, past the stairwell, past the flooded stretch I'd have to wade through. I went down the stairs with my flashlight low and hit the water at the bottom, cold, dark, up past my ankles now, maybe 6 inches higher than it had been. The smell was worse. River water and rust and something else I didn't want to think about. I moved fast, kept my steps deliberate but didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't stand in one place any longer than I had to. The corridor was about 40 feet long. I kept the flashlight ahead of me and didn't look at the windows. The boiler room door was at the end. The iron pipe was still wedged through the handle, angled down to the floor. I'd logged it as a safety measure on the way in. Previous contractor, standard practice, keeping an unsecured door from swinging open in a vacant structure. That's what I'd written in my notes. I stood in front of it now with my flashlight on the pipe and looked at the angle. If you're securing a door from the outside to keep people from accidentally going in, you wedge the pipe on the outside. That's the whole point. You're standing in the corridor, you slide the pipe through the handle, and you walk away. The pipe is between you and the door. This pipe was on the inside of the handle. Angled toward the door, someone had reached through from the corridor side and wedged it in a way that would hold the door closed from within. You'd have to thread it through deliberately at an awkward angle, specifically to keep whatever was on the other side from pushing out. That took me a second. Then I pulled the pipe free. The door swung open about 4 inches and stopped. Dark on the other side and the sound of moving water. I pushed it the rest of the way with my shoulder and swept the flashlight around. Boiler room. Old equipment, corroded pipes, a pressure gauge on the wall reading nothing, and a utility corridor on the far side, maybe 8 feet long, leading to a concrete alcove with a water main and the shutoff wheel. The burst pipe was somewhere in the system below. I could hear it, that constant pressure bleed sound. And the water in here was the same level as the corridor, dark and cold and still rising. The shutoff wheel was a standard gate valve, big red surface rust on the spokes. You turn it clockwise to close. That's always the direction. Righty-tighty, every valve I've ever touched. I grabbed it with both hands and turned it counterclockwise. It was stiff, really stiff. I put my weight into it, both hands on the spokes, and it moved maybe a quarter turn before it started to give. Then another quarter. The pressure sound changed, not quieter, louder, like I'd opened something up further down the line. Water started moving faster somewhere below me. I kept turning until the wheel spun free, and the sound peaked, and then settled into a lower, steadier rush. The water in the boiler room started rising, slowly at first, then faster. I waded back out, pulled the door behind me, and went back up the stairs. Judith was at the east window. She'd found an old coffee can somewhere, the metal kind, big, institutional, and she was banging it against the window frame every few seconds, steady and loud. She was also talking, just a continuous low stream of words directed out at the lot below, like she was narrating the flood to nobody. When she heard me on the stairs, she turned around.
"Still here,"
she said. "Good." I went to the far end of the room and sat down on a crate where I could watch the stairwell door and the window both. "Keep going." She kept going. I sat there in the dark and listened to the sounds from below. The rhythmic patience of them, the slow, deliberate movement I'd been hearing for the last hour. I listened to it, and I listened to Judith banging the coffee can against the window frame, and I waited to see which one changed first. It took maybe 15 minutes. The patience went out of the sounds. That's the only way I can put it. They'd been so even, so unhurried. And then something shifted. A different quality, faster, less regular, like something that had been certain was suddenly less certain. I sat very still on the crate and watched the stairwell door and didn't move. The sounds sped up, then stopped. Then, from somewhere below, a displacement. A long, low, rushing sound, like something large moving through standing water very fast. One direction. Away. Then nothing. Judith stopped banging the can.
"Was that?"
"Keep going," I said. "Not yet." She kept going. I sat there for another 20 minutes by my watch and didn't hear anything from below except water and the rain outside. Then I got up, went to the stairwell, and pointed my flashlight down. The water was higher, 6 inches up the bottom step, dark and undisturbed. No movement, no shape at the exterior wall through the window at the base of the stairs. I stood there for a full minute and watched the surface. Nothing broke it. I went back up. Judith was sitting on the floor near the east window, the empty can in her lap, when I got back. She looked up when I came through the door. "Well?" she said. "It's gone." I said it flat. "Water's still rising on the lower level, but the thing's gone. Moved back toward the river, I think." She let out a breath, not dramatic, just air leaving. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She stood up and her legs were shaky. She grabbed the windowsill for a second, then let go. I told her we needed to move before the ground floor got any worse. The water had been at 6 inches on the bottom step 20 minutes ago, and it wasn't going to stop. The rain hadn't stopped. The little Kanawha was still running. I said we had maybe a window right now and we should use it. She was already pulling her blazer straight, looking around for her bag. She'd set it on the break room table at some point, and she went back for it, came out with it over her shoulder. She looked more put together than she had any right to look at that hour, after all of that. I don't know how people do that. I probably looked like I'd been dragged through a culvert. "I'm parked up on the access road," she said. "Higher ground. I can drive around to the front and pick you up." "Wait for me," I said. "We'll go out together." "It's fine, Sawyer. My car's right there. I'll be faster without wading through." She gestured at the general situation, meaning me and my boots in the flooded floor. "Judith." "I'll have the heat on," she said, and she was already at the stairwell door. I said her name again. She was already through it. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds. I told myself she'd be fine. The access road was elevated. Her car was dry. She was moving. She'd been making noise. She'd be fine. I told myself that. Then I followed her down. The water on the ground floor was at my knees. Cold, dark, smelled like river mud and rust and something else I didn't want to think about. I moved slow because moving fast through water that depth is how you fall, and I wasn't going to fall in that building. I kept my flashlight up and I kept moving. The front exit was maybe 40 feet from the base of the stairs, and I walked it steady and didn't stop and didn't look at the walls. I got outside. The rain had dropped to a drizzle. The sky was starting to go from black to that dark gray that happens before dawn. Not light exactly, just less dark. The lot was still flooded, water across the gravel, but it had leveled off some. My car was still wedged against the barrier where the surge had pushed it, sitting at a bad angle with water around the tires. I didn't look at it long. I looked up the hill toward the access road. Judith's car was there, a white Honda Civic, maybe 4 years old, parked on the gravel shoulder of the access road where the elevation kept it dry. The engine was running. I could see the exhaust in the cold air. The headlights were on. The driver's door was standing open. I stood there for a second. I figured she'd just gotten out to look for me, maybe couldn't see me in the dark, maybe went to the edge to call down. I started up the embankment. The mud was soft and I slipped once, caught myself on a fence post that was barely still upright. I got to the access road and walked to the car. Empty. Engine running. Heat on. Her county ID badge on the dash. The door open. I called her name. Not loud, just called it. No answer. I looked at the ground. The mud on the shoulder was soft enough to hold prints. Her flats, small and narrow, pointed away from the car, not toward the building, not toward the road, away from the access road, down the other side of the embankment, toward the river. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was thinking there was an explanation. I think I was thinking she'd heard something seen something, gone to look. I followed the prints. They went down the embankment on the far side, through wet grass that was bent flat from the rain, through a stand of scrub brush that tore at my jacket. The ground sloped down toward the little Kanawha, and I followed it, and the prints followed it, and the river got louder. The bank was maybe 30 feet of mud and dead grass between the brush line and the water. The river was running fast and black and high, way above its normal line, carrying debris. Branches, something plastic, things I didn't look at too long. The sound of it was constant and loud. I followed the footprints to the edge of the bank. They stopped. Just stopped. At the water line. The mud was churned a little, both feet, like she'd been standing there, like she'd stopped there. And then nothing. No prints going back, no prints going sideways along the bank. No sign she'd gone anywhere except into the water. I stood there. The river ran past me, and I stood there. And I didn't call her name again because I already knew. I knew before I followed the prints. I think I knew when I saw the car door open. I think part of me knew when I told her to keep making noise, keep moving, stay at the east window. Stay still, I'd said. Stay there. I'll handle it. I'd put her in that room. I told her to be quiet and stationary, and I'd gone downstairs and made as much noise as I could, moved as fast as I could, opened the boiler room, and released the water and made myself the loudest, most present thing in that building. And she'd been exactly where I'd left her. The binder was upstairs. Maurice Alexander's handwriting was upstairs. The pattern was upstairs, the one I'd read twice and understood and used. The creature didn't take whoever ran, didn't take whoever fought or moved or made noise. It took whoever waited. I'd been moving since the moment I understood that. Every single minute after I read those pages, I'd been moving. And I'd told Judith to stay. I hadn't told her to stay because I thought it would save her. I'd told her to stay because I needed her there. I needed something stationary and quiet and present in that building while I made noise somewhere else, and I'd used the only other person in the building to do it. And I hadn't even let myself think about it clearly enough to call it what it was. I stood at the river's edge with the water running fast in front of me and the building dark behind me and her car idling up the hill, and I stood there for a long time. The sky kept going gray. Not lighter exactly, just less dark. The drizzle stopped. The river kept running. I had her key ring in my jacket pocket. I don't remember picking it up from the car. I must have grabbed it when I looked inside, some automatic thing, some habit. I pulled it out and looked at it. A small ring with 3 keys on it and a little plastic tag from the Tyler County Assessor's office. Blue. Her name printed on it in small white letters. I put it back in my pocket. I sat down on the embankment above the water line in the wet grass, and I waited for the emergency crew. They came in 2 vehicles, a county emergency truck and a white SUV with reflective tape on the doors. I heard them before I saw them, tires on gravel, then voices, then the crunch of boots moving through wet ground. I didn't stand up. I just watched them come down the embankment toward me, flashlights sweeping the lot, the building, the water. There were 4 of them. 3 in gear, 1 in a county uniform. The one in uniform got to me first.
You sing?
He said. Yeah. He crouched down to my level, sharp blue eyes, clean jaw, looked like he'd been awake for a while but was handling it fine. His name tag said Clark. He asked me where the other person was, and I told him she went to the river. I said it plain, like I was reading off a form. I pointed toward the bank. I told him where the footprints ended. He looked at me for a second. Then he stood up and called to the others, and they moved. I stayed on the embankment. I could hear them working the bank downstream, flashlights cutting through the dark, calling out her name. Judith Sanchez, her name in other people's mouths. I sat in the wet grass and listened to them say it over and over, and I looked at the water. The little Kanawha was still running fast. Brown and full and indifferent. Whatever it had taken, it had already carried a long way from here. Clark came back after a few minutes and sat down near me, not close, just near. He had a notepad. He asked me to walk him through it, and I did. I told him about the flood alert, the car shifting in the lot, the call to dispatch. I told him we'd sheltered on the upper floor. I told him the water had started receding and Judith had gone ahead to her car while I was still inside. I told him I'd followed her out and found the door open and the footprints leading down. All of it true, every word of it true. I'm not sure that matters, but it's what happened. He wrote it down, didn't ask me anything I couldn't answer, didn't push on the gaps. He was thorough in the way people are thorough when they've already formed the picture and they're just filling in the paperwork around it. Flash flood event, Tyler County. One victim swept into the Little Kanawha. He'd probably written that sentence before he got here. I gave him the binder. I'd been holding it since I came out of the building, tucked under my arm. And I handed it to him and told him what it was. The 2004 OSHA incident report. The 1994 report behind it. Maurice Alexander's handwritten notes in both. I told him there was a pattern across both events, and that the foreman had documented it privately, and that the official findings hadn't reflected what he'd written. Clark flipped through it. He looked at Maurice's handwriting. He looked at the dates. He looked at me.
You want me to include this in the report?
He said. I want it on record, I said. What you do with it is your call. He looked at the binder again for a moment. Then he put it under his arm. He wrote something in his notepad. He asked if I needed medical attention, and I said no. He told me they'd need me available for follow-up, and I gave him my number. He thanked me for staying on site, and I nodded, and that was pretty much it. The search went another 40 minutes. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign of her in either direction along the bank. Clark recorded the official finding just before 6 in the morning, standing about 15 feet from me, talking into a handheld recorder in that flat report-ready voice. Judith Sanchez, 27 County Assessor's Office, presumed swept into the Little Kanawha River during flash flood event Tuesday morning, Tyler County. Cause of death, presumed drowning. Search suspended pending river conditions. He clicked it off. I stood up. My legs were stiff and my boots were still wet, and I was cold in a way that had stopped feeling like anything particular. Just a fact about my body. Clark walked me up to the access road. Judith's car was still there, engine finally off. Someone had cut it at some point. The driver's door was closed now. I don't know who closed it. I looked at it for a second and then I looked away. My car was in the lot below, still sitting at an angle against the barrier where the surge had pushed it. The water had dropped enough that I could get to it. One of the crew guys helped me push it straight, and I checked underneath, and it started on the third try. I sat there for a minute with the heat running, looking at the building through the windshield. Mather Mill. Gray stone and broken windows, and 11 years of nobody. It just sat there. I put the binder on the passenger seat and I drove out. I missed the Friday deadline. I knew I would before I even hit the highway. I called my contact at the firm from a gas station outside St. Mary's, standing next to a pump in wet cargo pants, and told him there had been a flood event and I hadn't completed the inspection. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes. He said they'd try to push the deadline, but the buyer was already nervous and it probably wouldn't hold. I said I understood. The sale fell through the following Monday. I got the email while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Morgantown eating cereal I didn't taste. The buyer had walked. The firm was sorry for the inconvenience. They hoped the flood situation hadn't been too disruptive. I read it twice, and then I closed my laptop. The binder was on my kitchen counter. I'd carried it in from the car without really deciding to. It sat there for about a week before I moved it to the shelf in my office between an old copy of the International Building Code and a spiral notebook I use for site sketches. I don't know why I kept it. I'm not sure I had a reason. It just didn't seem like something I should throw away. There was a follow-up call from Clark about 10 days later. Routine stuff. He confirmed the case details. asked me to verify a couple of timeline points, told me the river search had been formally closed. He said the family had been notified. He said if I thought of anything else to reach out. I said I would. I didn't think of anything else. Or I thought of plenty of things, and none of them were things I was going to say to Gavin Clark. I went back to work the week after that. Had a site visit in Fairmont, a commercial building conversion, nothing complicated. I drove out there on a Wednesday morning with my clipboard and my camera, and I did the job. I wrote the report. I filed it by Thursday afternoon. I'm good at the work. I've always been good at it. You go in, you look at what's there, you document it accurately, you move on to the next one. That's the whole job. Most of the time it's fine. I think about Maurice Alexander sometimes. 60 years old, gruff, haunted, writing the same addendum twice in 10 years because he couldn't let the official finding be the only finding. He never told anyone, never went to the press, never called an engineer, never did anything except write it down in the back of a binder that sat in a records room for 2 decades. I don't know if that makes him a coward or just a man who understood that no one was going to believe him. Probably both, maybe neither. I'm not sure I'm the right person to judge that. The binder's still on my shelf. Judith Sanchez's keyring is in the top drawer of my desk. I don't know why I kept that either. It's just a ring with 3 keys and a blue plastic tag from the Tyler County Assessor's Office, her name in small white letters. I'm alive. That's the whole story. I went to Mather Mill on a Tuesday morning and I came home and I'm alive. I don't have anything else to say about it.